And this is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Michael Monks. It was September 1821 when a small group of Cincinnatians dedicated the first Jewish cemetery west of the Allegheny Mountains in what is now this city's West End. A few years later, they founded this city's first Jewish synagogue. Now, 2 centuries later, Cincinnati is gearing up for a momentous 15-month celebration of the city's significant Jewish heritage called the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial. Naturally, that history includes a number of prominent figures in the founding of Reform Judaism right here. The series of festivities and events is aimed at underscoring the contribution that Jewish immigrants and minorities as a whole have made and continue to make in Greater Cincinnati. Joining Cincinnati Edition to talk about it are Jewish Cemeteries of Greater Cincinnati Executive Director David Harris. David, welcome to Cincinnati Edition.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great to be here.
And we have Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial Co-Chair Tamara Harkavy. Tamara, thank you for being with us also.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's our pleasure to have you. David, I drive past a cemetery, which is right outside this station, every day, naturally, as I'm pulling into the garage here. There's been some work going on there recently. So if you would, take us back to 1821 and tell us why this cemetery is important.
Well, Michael, this was really the very first institution that the burgeoning Jewish community formed here in Cincinnati. You know, we had several early settlers, mostly from England. And at some point in 1821, one of them nearing his death advised some other Jewish community members that he knew that he wanted to be buried in consecrated ground and tasked them with finding a location for a Jewish cemetery. And that's how first cemetery was founded in 1821.
What brought the first Jewish immigrants to this area?
Now, these were immigrants who were coming just as other immigrants were coming from all over Europe at the time to embark on the adventure of the American frontier. And Cincinnati, as you know, was a frontier town, came down the Ohio River, and it was a burgeoning community, and they just wanted to be a part of it like everywhere else.
When we kick off the bicentennial celebration on Sunday, September 26th at the Chestnut Street Cemetery, which will be rededicated during the event, what can we expect there?
Well, we've done a lot of work on cleaning monuments. We were grateful to be able to partner with AmeriCorps on doing some cleaning of those really old, delicate monuments. We've restored the brick wall that goes along Chestnut Street. There'll be a new fence going in. And really the highlight is this beautiful educational plaza that will be dedicated there that will have signage about the early settlers and the Jewish community, as well as, some information about the West End as a neighborhood. And really hope to create a space there where tour groups and school groups and people just interested in history and the history of this city as a whole can come learn about the contributions of the Jewish community.
Let's go to Tamara now. She's co-chair of the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial. Tamara, this isn't your first time chairing anniversary celebrations. I understand you chaired the 50th and 60th celebrations of Israel for the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati. And this is a pretty monumental celebration, I suppose. This is now a 200th anniversary. How do you begin?
Well, you multiply 50 times 4 or something like that. But I love that you're asking that question because Cincinnati's history is super rich and the contributions of Jews to the city is also really, really rich. And, I know Tall Stacks was created to celebrate the founding of Cincinnati. And then as we roll through the years, nobody loves to celebrate themselves more than Cincinnati does. So this was just a beautiful excuse to come back together again as a community, to look back and touch on the many, many contributions that Jews have had in the city, in arts and culture, business and enterprise, social justice, Jewish life and education and humanities, but also to set the stage for the next 200 years. And I love what David is doing at the cemetery because as the neighborhood is reborn, so too is our cemetery. So we're excited. We've got a ton of activities and events and comings together planned for the next 15 months.
David, this cemetery is significant for its age and its relationship to the Jewish community here. We describe it as the first Jewish cemetery west of the Allegheny Mountains. We often hear such and such is the first west of the Allegheny Mountains. What kind of work has gone into, I guess, confirming the history of that cemetery here in this community?
Great question, Michael. So we have done quite a bit of research. We applied for an Ohio historical marker that will be installed at the cemetery as well. And in the process of putting together that application, we did a lot of research. We're grateful for the expertise of our friends at the American Jewish Archives on the campus of Hebrew Union College. Rabbi Dr. Gary Zola and Dr. Dana Herman were instrumental in helping us put together that application. And so it's been thoroughly researched. We were able to find actually the will of Benjamin Laib, who is that very first burial that I mentioned. And his will does lay out his request, in fact, for some of these other early Jewish settlers to establish a sacred ground for Jewish burial going forward.
Tamara, how did Cincinnati find itself in this historic role in Jewish history?
Wow, that's a great question. There's so many monumental contributions that Cincinnati Jews have made over the last 200 years. They run the gamut. So, do you know Manischewitz Matzah was founded in Cincinnati? Was I think it was called the Cincinnati Matzah Company. I mean, and now it is this international kosher producer of wine and matzah and gefilte fish, and you can find it on shelves all over the world. And those kinds of things are kind of mind blowing. One of my favorite stories. Can I tell you a story?
Oh, of course.
Okay, good. One of my favorite stories is the story of King Records. That's got a history that's not so far away, not so long gone. But King Records was started by a gentleman named Sid Nathan. And, his reputation was he was a little irascible and pretty single-minded, but he created a uniquely self-sufficient operation. They recorded in the studio, they published music, they had their own pressing plant and printing plant for labels and a distribution system. That in and of itself was pretty amazing, but he also broke color barriers. There were musicians that were at the studio waiting for a session, and it could have been a black drummer and a white singer, and he put them together. And out of that, because of this, we got the Delmore Brothers, we got Hank Ballard, and hundreds of musicians. But we love to celebrate James Brown and his 1956 release of Please, 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 which set his career on fire. That is an incredible story. We want the world to know, and we want to celebrate that.
I imagine that's just one of many hidden stories that you'll be resurfacing over the course of the next 15 months. David, perhaps you can also help us understand the significance of Cincinnati and overall Jewish history. We talk about it being the birthplace of American Reform Judaism. That seems rather significant. How did that happen here?
Absolutely. I mean, the early Jewish settlers did not know from Reform Judaism, which was a relatively new concept at the time. But as the years rolled on and the congregation started to form, there were significant rabbinic figures who were affiliated with the Reform movement, who made their way to Cincinnati. Most notably is Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, the founder of the Plum Street Temple that's right downtown across from City Hall. As well as other important rabbinic figures. And they really helped to create a center here for Reform Judaism. But there were also influential Orthodox rabbis and rabbis who were influential in the conservative movement, as well as just a real social service-oriented community that was really innovative. The model that we know of the United Way is really based off of a model that was founded here in Cincinnati by members of the Jewish community when they created what was known as United Jewish Charities, which is the precursor to the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati that still exists today and is really our convener for our leader in the community for convening our agencies and helping with our Jewish Community Relations Council, our public relations arm. And all of that really started here in Cincinnati, the first Jewish hospital, when Jewish doctors didn't necessarily have places where they could be employed because there were quotas at other hospitals. The first Jewish hospital in this country was founded here in Cincinnati. So it's always, for some reason, just been a really innovative community. And I think that that's probably in some ways just due to the ethos of the city as a whole, not just the Jewish community, but the city of Cincinnati has an ethos of innovation and leadership.
We're talking about the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial, 200 years of Judaism in Cincinnati, dating all the way back to 1821 and the founding of a small cemetery. We're joined by Tamara Harkavy, co-chair of the Bicentennial Celebration, and David Harris, executive director of Jewish Cemeteries of Greater Cincinnati. Tamara, part of the vision statement for the Bicentennial Celebration is to lift up other minorities and immigrant groups to explore their contributions on the society here. Why is that important during the Jewish Bicentennial Celebration?
I think it's important all the time, but we get an opportunity to highlight that and inspire and educate and connect the city through the work that we're doing. Social justice, social action has been, I think it's part, as David said, it's part of the Jewish ethos. We are taught as humans to take care of one another. And I think that through some of the work that we're doing with the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial, we will be giving back to communities. We have a project in partnership with Wavepool called The Fridge, ETC, and it's a series of refrigerators that will be placed in neighborhoods of need, stocked with free food. And that nothing could make us happier than to help people who need help and work together in communities to make this a better city.
David, can you talk a bit about the local Jewish community's connections to social justice movements of the past and even today?
So the Jewish community has certainly been engaged in social justice issues in the city. The history, like the history of any community, is not all rosy. There were challenges throughout our history, and there still are today. And we're working on making sure that we're continuing to build bridges with other communities, other religious groups, other cultural groups. And other minorities. And, as Tamara was saying, one of the really great opportunities that we see in the Bicentennial is the opportunity to not just highlight the contributions of the Jewish community, but to highlight the contributions of immigrant and minority communities. We are but one example of a community that has really helped to enrich the city as a whole. And that could be said, all over the country. And at a time when, unfortunately, there are attacks on immigrant and minority communities, we just felt it's really important to raise everybody up, and in addition to celebrating the accomplishments of the Jewish community as well.
And David, part of the information that was put together by organizers of the Jewish Bicentennial, the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial, suggests that without Cincinnati Jewish history, U.S. history would look radically different. Is that bigger than just the foundation of Reform Judaism here?
Absolutely. There are so many contributions that have been made. The first Jewish settler that we know of was a man named Joseph Jonas, and he had a brother, Abraham Jonas, who followed him shortly after in the 1820s. And Abraham Jonas was a confidant of Abraham Lincoln. And had sway with Abraham Lincoln. So there are all sorts of examples of ways in which these early Jewish settlers helped to shape the country and have continued to help to shape the country. And, as Rabbi Dr. Gary Zola of the American Jewish Archive says, you can't tell the story of American Judaism without mentioning Cincinnati, which is not something that we would normally necessarily think of, but it is absolutely the truth.
Are there, I know that other Jewish cemeteries exist in the city. There will be tours of the cemeteries and some programs. Is there anything significant about Jewish cemeteries that those of us who are not Jewish might think as different or recognizably different?
Well, certainly, Michael, one thing is you'll see that many of the monuments have Hebrew on them, which is the language that's used, of course. But I would say one thing that people often note is that in many Jewish cemeteries, you will not see people leaving flowers. Some places you do, but generally it's traditional to leave a stone on the Jewish tombstone when you go to visit. And there are all sorts of explanations for why that might be. And they range from wanting to make sure that somebody else knows that somebody has come and visited this loved one's grave, to the idea that we want this person to be remembered forever. Stones last forever, whereas flowers wither away. There are also, some historical, pragmatic reasons that we surmise that this tradition started. But that's one of the interesting traditions people might notice.
And there is a partnership, Tamara, among some local museums. The Museum Center will be hosting an exhibit of 200 years of Jewish life in Cincinnati, and also a portrait exhibit at the Cincinnati Art Museum and some other local museums of noted Cincinnati Jews. Perhaps we could talk about some of the noted Cincinnati Jews that we can expect to be highlighted in this portrait exhibit.
Well, I think at the Art Museum, we're going to see works of Henry Mosler. And he was a Cincinnati/Dayton probably native. And we love that the Art Museum is digging into their archives to highlight his works. Additionally, at the Skirball Museum, Abby Schwartz, who is the head of the Skirball Museum, is reaching out to Cincinnatians far and wide to get works that are in private collections that have never been seen. There's portraits of Rabbi Osher, Rabbi Ostreicher, I'm trying to remember his name, and unknown artists, but we will be able to see that progression of. I love the idea of showing portraiture because you can see the progression of the old world into the new world through what people are wearing and just the affectations of each of the images that will be shown. I also love that we have the partnerships with the Contemporary Art Center, with the Skirball, with the Art Museum, with Playhouse, with the ballet, with the opera, with the symphony, and I could go on and on. Some of the programs will be specially commissioned works of music, and others are going to be opportunities just to share stories through operatic or symphonic music. But all of this will highlight the way that we in Cincinnati enjoy the arts and how the arts can tell stories to bring us together.
The University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music will host a sing-along concert tracing the history of Jewish Cincinnati through songs written by Jewish composers and lyricists. And the Cincinnati Opera will present Warsaw Cabaret, which is described as an imagined recreation of an evening at a cafe in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941. And Tamara, you come from the arts as part of your professional background. You were the CEO and artistic director of Artworks. Is there a deep historic connection between the Jewish community here and Cincinnati's arts community?
Oh, that is so wonderful that you bring that up. I understand and know from just my years in this town watching the arts thrive that so many of our arts organizations were founded by and are supported by the Jewish community. And it's also kind of a special thing to note. I think it's the Contemporary Art Center, and unlike David, who's an amazing historian, I think the CAC was actually founded by a group of Jewish women. Additionally, it takes a village, but I'm really proud to say that so many of our arts organizations have been fronted by and supported by women. And you can see that through the years, from Irma Lazarus all the way to folks who you wouldn't even imagine who have an affiliation to Jewish life and Jews in the city.
And David, as folks start to participate in these many months ahead of the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial, well, what do you think might surprise people the most about Cincinnati's Jewish history?
I think just the breadth of it, and Tamara really hit on a lot of the great elements, but there are connections, of course, with the Crone Conservatory and places that Cincinnatians know and love. Our parks have a connection to Murray Seasongood, one of the early Jewish mayors of Cincinnati, a leader of the progressive movement. People may not know that Frank's Hot Sauce, that everybody knows and loves, is a Cincinnati company founded by a Jewish family. Or they may know Lippman Pike, the early Reds baseball player from 1877 to 78, who was Jewish. There's just so many different places and ways in which the Jewish community has been involved in the great, and we're so proud of that. And again, it's just an example of the ways in which other immigrant and minority communities have contributed. But we're certainly proud of these contributions, and I think people will just be really impressed with the breadth of programming, the rich history, and all of the opportunities to celebrate together.
Some of the famous Jewish people of Cincinnati origins include Steven Spielberg, the legendary Hollywood film director.
Yes, that's such an unknown thing, but yes, he is a Cincinnatian.
It is.
Would you please call him and see if he'll come back here?
If I had his number, we wouldn't be talking right now, I'm afraid to say. But unfortunately, here we all are. And that is true. I was surprised to learn that just a few years ago. He's somebody who's been part of our national cultural conscience for so long, and he does have some origins right here in Cincinnati. Of course, oral polio vaccine developer Albert Sabin. We all know Jerry Springer is from here as well.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, some of those famous brands, including what you just mentioned, David Frank's Hot Sauce, among several national brands that were founded by Jewish families here. Well, we will look forward to a full year plus of celebrating Jewish Cincinnati's bicentennial. It starts with a kickoff on September 26th at the Chestnut Street Cemetery, which will be rededicated on that Sunday. We've got details at wvxu.org inside the Cincinnati Edition tab. David Harris is the Executive Director of Jewish Cemeteries of Greater Cincinnati, and Tamara Harkavy is the co-chair of the Jewish Cincinnati Bicentennial. David, Tamara, thanks so much for sharing some time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
And you've been listening to Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. Our producer is Selena Reeder. Our assistant producer is Nick Swartzel. Our technical director is Josh Elstro. This theme music was composed by Rob Fetters. You can find archives of our program online at wvxu.org. I'm Michael Monks. We'll talk again tomorrow.